Well, hello. How's it going, man?
It's good. Summer is going. Just got back from Dallas, Texas. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing all right. I am currently in Kentucky now at kids camp. They're off doing something. So I've got some time, some downtime, but man, we needed to do a video. We didn't have a chance to do it last week. We were all traveling or getting home and
Yeah.
exhausted from Southern Baptist Convention. So I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk today.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun. And people are now wanting to know what happened. The mainstream media has their own take on how evil the Southern Baptists are for standing for biblical values. And then on the inside, you know, uh, pool. You and I had some things we discussed. By the way, if you haven't watched our video leading up to the Southern Baptist Convention, I would recommend you go watch that before you listen to this one, because we don't have time to kind of recap all the issues. Just kind of let people know what happened.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's true, but I will say we were pretty right, pretty spot on with what we thought from what we were reading and from the people we were seeing. I think it was pretty spot on of what actually was going to take place. Now,
yeah.
what took place, that's an interesting, that'd be some good commentary we need to bring in, talk through.
Yeah. Well, why don't we jump in with a prayer and then go at it.
Let's do it.
All right. Join me in the Lord's Prayer, if you will. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
All right, you
Well,
want to tackle the three issues first, or you want to go? How do you want to hit this?
let's start with the three, because I think the way that we talk about the resolutions at the end, I think is a better high note. So I feel like convention was a little bit of a mixed bag for people. I don't know about you, but I feel like I left this year a lot more encouraged, um, than last year. I think last year there was the kind of the emotion of we were almost there. We're about to
Yeah.
finally finish this process. Let's vote on law amendment stuff. Um, this year, I think, pressure was kind of off. However, but we had those votes that took place, and like we had said in the previous video, that the three big votes were abolish the ERLC, uh, law amendment put out by Juan Sanchez. He's the one who did it this time, and the other one was the main
Financial,
one, financial
financial transparency.
transparency. Yeah. So those were the big ones. And all three of those motions failed. Now, here are the pieces that I kind of left with. First off, let's talk about the law amendment piece. Because and let me start by saying this. From the people that you read online, and they're guys that I would say you and I both agree with. We like. If I you and I don't know about you, Andrew. I feel like I'm in a very weird spot because there's guys that I would say I have an affinity for. I think we're very similar in terms of um, how what we view as happening in the convention, where we think it should go. But at the same time, we also have a lot of respect for, our executive directors, for Jeff Orge. We know them. I trust them as
Yeah.
well. And so it's kind of this weird place of, I really do love those guys. I respect them. And I do. Yeah, actually, on one of the most recent ones, I voted with more aligned with them because I do trust them. At the same time, where I'm coming from, I also kind of see it. I really do see some of the problems that I think the guys are raising that I read their articles and kind of focus, and hear from. And so those guys who who really brought a lot of the heat this time, those guys, I've heard they're people who maybe are on the fringes who follow them. I was seeing some of these fringe people saying, "Well, it's time to leave. We're done. We're done with the SBC." And I didn't interpret the meetings to go that way. People are saying, "Now it's sealed. We have this liberal drift." I just don't see it. I don't see. When I say that, I'm not saying that there's not, but I'm saying is that the votes tell us that the majority of Southern Baptists are still very conservative. And I think there's disagreements of how we go about
Yes.
express. I think that's really what it comes down to. And so law amendment failed, didn't get the two-thirds majority. Instead of getting 66, we got what, like 62%, almost the exact same thing as last year.
Right. Right. Yeah. So yeah, if we just kind of go through it, the law amendment was once again the vote to put our confessional statement in our Constitution regarding pastors are limited to men as qualified by Scripture, and so a church that would have a woman pastor on staff in that office would not be in friendly cooperation. So that would give our credentials committees kind of no room to not disfellowship those churches. Well, that's a constitutional amendment, takes a supermajority in 2 consecutive years. Last year we were just shy of getting it on the second year, and the forces of the platform and all of the uh, kind of they brought everything to bear against it, and it barely failed. This year, like we said, I think we nailed it pretty much. This was not an election year for the president. It was, but there was no one really contesting our current president, who's a little more conservative, and so you don't have that fire in the belly, so to speak, on the messenger's part on this. So 60% is still pretty high. It's just not the super majority that's needed. That's not going away. I think that that's the key there. People that are like, oh no, we're no worse off than we were last year. We didn't lose ground. You'll get more enthusiasm as we have heightened years. It's kind of like almost an off year for congressional seats. When the president's not running, you get less of a turnout and kind of less enthusiasm. So
Yeah.
I think that, but that's not going away. And even as we've said, even if that passes, you then still have to stay on the enforcement. And so we can stay on the enforcement right now and keep the credentials committee accountable based on our Baptist faith and message.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is large of a loss as people fear. I do think we're going to get something along the lines of a law amendment at some point if our leadership doesn't take more active measures to do what Jeff Orge had suggested, that we read at our last video of, let's do something to elevate what it means to be a pastor in the convention in the minds of the churches and convince everyone that this is not what we do.
Yeah.
So, I really would like to see that happen more actively. So, perhaps that'll be the way, but we will address it. This isn't going away. So don't leave the churches.
Yeah.
It's, if you didn't leave last year, don't leave now.
I left with two takeaways from that too. So not only the takeaway of, hey, majority are still there. We
Yeah.
just didn't get that. But I also think that other group that didn't vote for, I talked to somebody and I thought there was a really interesting take. He's told me, he said, look, he said, because I don't doubt he and I are on the same page when it comes to the biblical office for pastor is a man, not a woman, that we don't make any room for that. And he said to me, he said, my hope and I don't doubt that for many in that room that we're all on the same page there. He says, the issue that I have with this is not theology. He said, if this is an issue of theology, there should be no reason why there's not a 100% vote on that. He says,
Yeah.
the reason why I don't see this as, I see this as problematic and why I voted against it, he told me, was he said, is I see this from a church autonomy perspective. He said, that we are, we are a autonomous group of churches who cooperate, and who are we to tell other churches what they can and can't, use for a title of their thing, for their individuals, their leaders. And he said this. He said, we already have it. So I'd be curious to dig this up, and I'd love to probably talk to somebody more who works in the convention. And maybe I do ask my executive director about this, or maybe somebody else who's maybe on the executive committee. I don't know. But he had said that the way that it currently works is if you do belong to a SBC church that has, that does not affirm Baptist faith and message, does not affirm these things, that you can still cooperate, but that you don't get to send your people are ineligible from belonging in leadership. They are ineligible from serving as trustees. They're ineligible from serving on committees. And that because there is a standard there. Now, I know there was a push, right? That we said that we need to make sure that Baptist Faith and Message reaffirm those kind of things. So,
Yeah.
in his viewpoint is that the system should already work that way. The big question, as you come back to, is the enforcement, right? Does it actually work that way?
Yeah.
And so I can understand, like I said, that made me leave realizing that in that room, there's probably a lot more guys that are like him who we are theologically indistinguishable from our position, but he comes more from this is an autonomy issue, and we're not going to tell people what titles they can and can't use if we all hold the line on a certain way. So I can understand that piece, at least for that. I'm not there. I think the
Right.
titles mean something even more, and we should hold that.
Yeah, and I think and there's generational stuff going on here too with kind of that older generation is they came through the feminist movement and saw good things, and now what you're seeing kind of societal level is a pushback among men and women, saying maybe the latest wave of feminism was not as good as we we thought it was, and there's a number of things you can point to, but I think you see that as a wedge issue. And then, the pre-2000 Baptists that came up kind of had a more of a rigorous autonomy view than the post-2000. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on, but that's the beauty of, respecting your elders and working together and trying to get on this issue. One of the things I think that sandbagged the law amendment. Now, we changed the rules last year so that if someone wanted to address a constitutional amendment, it actually would be referred in year one to the executive committee, and then it would come out and you'd have 2 years of voting. So we turned a 2 year process into a 3 year process. Well, what we did at the convention is we voted to bring this out early and take away that year of it sitting with the executive committee so that we could vote on it right away and get that 2 year process started. I don't know if that was the right move, but we were successful on that and we got 60 votes. But right before the vote, Dr. Jeff Orge came out and mentioned that we are trying to settle some lawsuits
Yeah.
and that changing our constitution could have some impact on one in particular pending lawsuit. That I think really hurt the vote. I think we probably had 66. That alone, so many of us are concerned about these lawsuits that aren't settled, going back to the abuse crisis and defamation lawsuits that came as a result of what went down. And Dr. Orge basically was ready to retire, and we asked him to come in and help us out of this mess. And he's doing that, and I think he's doing that well. A lot of people were really resentful towards him because he came out at a couple moments on some key votes that hurt our opportunity to get these passed. I'm not resentful. I think he's doing what we asked him to do. He's trying to clean up a mess, and when this mess is clean, he basically said, "In a year, this will be over, and then you guys do whatever you want."
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's how I interpret it.
yeah,
I saw a lot of
yeah,
people who,
yeah,
who I liked even who were posting some pretty mean things, some memes about Orge saying, like, hey, theology matters until there's a lawsuit. And if the lawyers say they don't do it. Like I thought that was pretty disingenuous. I actually
yeah,
left there thinking the same way you was saying, which was let this one play out.
yeah,
And then, at that point, we'll know if this is going to be easier because he's been slammed with them having to clean up
yeah.
all of that. And so I actually left there saying, okay, well, we'll just do it again next time. We'll just do it next
Right.
time and we'll be good to go. You
And
know,
and my view is it's largely symbolic anyway because it takes 2 years. So I
yeah,
voted in favor, knowing it wasn't going to really impact the lawsuit because it was still a year in the process. But I get it, and that was a tactic, but it also wasn't untrue,
yeah.
So
And
the
I
other thing
also
is
think,
we've never had this in the Constitution,
yeah,
so waiting a year isn't going to
yeah,
hurt us, and that's where I think maybe we erred tactically in not sending this to the executive committee,
yeah.
letting them have that mandate from the messengers to do something. Maybe what we don't need is a constitutional amendment, but we do need them to lead us on this issue because right now it's unsettled and it needs to get settled. So
So this is all tied to really the rest of the theme, which is I think one of the reasons why is there's no trust in leadership anymore, right? And that comes down to the financial transparency issues. That comes down. Everybody says that they were saying trust the trustees, but they're saying that we don't even know if the trustees have all the information. Are they really being able to hold anybody accountable? And so that's where I think some of these guys are saying They don't trust the system. I will say sometimes you wonder, are some of these people, trying to blow things up because they're not part of the system and they don't get to be in it? They're not playing that role. Is there some bitterness? You don't know what the motives are behind that. But I do definitely we see that culturally now too, is there is a distrust for top down leaders, that there's this distrust for what happens behind the scenes kind of stuff. And so you see that with the next motion, right? That was the transparency one of, hey, we're looking for that all of our leaders should be filling out, all the entities should fill out, something akin to a I-90. Was it I-90? Was that what it was?
990, 990.
990 form. And and they were saying the least should be that trustees should all know it. And there was some confusion of, do all the trustees know it or do the trustees not know it? And one guy came up from IMB and said, I'm a trustee and we all know it. We all voted on these things. I think that really comes down to is there's a lot of, I think they want to know who's getting money, where's money coming from, and they also want to know what our entity heads are being paid.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think a lot of that's hugely uh, pointed at NAM. And
Yes.
there's a lot of, I mean, that was last year, everybody criticizing their use of funds. I do think that, yeah, I mean, they're an easy target for some of this. What I have heard too behind the scenes is a lot of this came out with when somebody was let go, they had sued for their how what they were anticipating they were going to have when they were let go. And the question is, how much were they making, since that's the number they asked for? And if that guy's not even at the top, how much is the top making? And so, yeah, people are wanting to know, are our entities that we're giving cooperative program funds living on million plus salaries or not? And I think that's a legitimate thing to ask and want to know. The least should be that we should all know, what that is. But yeah, that one failed as well because largely we don't want to go through everybody's finances and we don't want to have to know everything but trustees should 100% know everything.
Well, and of course, so what we discovered, our consist once again, Dr. Orge came out and kind of took the wind out of this. Now, this was recommended to the finance to the executive committee last year, and they came out with a new financial plan, which the messenger who's trying to bring the 990 transparency to our entities was very much against the new plan because he thought it actually was less transparent than what we had before. And I think in some ways it is, in some ways it's better. Um, I think what you actually really do see is that the messengers do not totally lack trust in our leadership. As much as the people that are very upset, there's no
Yeah.
trust. No, what we found is there is a pretty high degree of trust. That's why these are failing. Now, there is a check on that trust that people in leadership should be hearing because these votes are coming up. But we voted to approve the financial plan upon the recommendation of Dr. Orge and the executive committee without amendment. And this Burns amendment was going to require that 990 information. And what we found is that there's confusion on a number of issues there. And that's kind of what we suggested in our last video, is that the devil's in the details. And because of that, people are going to be not inclined to make major changes. So I think that this failed for that reason. Um, I'm not that concerned yet. But I do know that different entities have different rules for different trustees. Some of these entities are very large with a large number of trustees, and they have committees, and some that are dealing with finances, and others that are dealing with different aspects. So not everybody knows everything in each of the entities. I'm okay with that, but I am concerned. And Jeff Orch brought out a good point. He said, here's the difference between your system and other systems that do this. We do not have a self-perpetuating trustee board at our entities. And so a university that's not under the SBC might have a perpetuating trustee board that they roll off and they decide who's coming in next. In that situation, there's no direct accountability to the messengers. And so they need to have accountability, and the 990 provides a level of accountability.
Mhm.
Um, we are the messengers. We are the trustees. And you were on what? You were on the committee on nominations, and I was on the committee on committees, or vice versa. I can't. I keep mixing these up lately.
Yeah.
Um, we selected you selected me to be on the committee that selected trustees, and I got to be a part of two in particular trustees as a result of serving in this capacity. That is something that works, right? And I think that this is one of those things that was kind of a good counterpoint that hadn't been discussed. And I think it took the wind out of the sails once again on this financial transparency issue. If we don't like it, then let's get to these conventions and let's get trustees that are going to demand
Yeah.
information and not just be yes men of the entities. And
Yeah.
that's going to take some work. Now, related to this, somebody had passed a motion that we cannot have any trustees who are on receiving payment from any sort of SBC entity, association director, or working for NAM or something like that. I thought that was interesting. People were really upset that didn't pass as well. But even in that, this is a no-brainer. Anyone who's receiving funds should not be a trustee.
Yeah.
Uh, when I was serving in the nominations committee, we found out that certain entities have rules, but most of them do limit the percentage of trustees who can be serving in one of those capacities to a small percentage of the overall body. And so, sometimes you might want a trustee who's got associational missionary background, but you don't want the whole thing composed of that. And so, even as these things are thrown up from the floor, when you get into these um, when you get into the actual mechanisms that govern this, you find out that so often the messengers don't have the whole story, and it is a little dangerous to just change these things from the floor. And I think it's healthy for us to be a little gun shy about how much we want to change from the floor.
It's true.
I think it helps you and I, though, is we know Dr. Jeff Orge personally, and we trust him. And I think that helps. A lot of these folks just kind of see him as a continuation of the
The
Greer
swamp.
administration
Yeah. Yeah.
and he's definitely not that.
Well,
So
I do think, no, I think you're right that there is some pieces that gave me pause, which was we have messed things up. The convention has messed things up when we have said, let's do this. We're going to enact this big push, this big change. And and I do think that pause of like, okay, just so on that one too, that was one that there was that say, hey, you don't necessarily know what you're going to open up when you do it this way. And so I think that was probably something that I think maybe was a mood that was kept in check. It kept people in check was, do we want to make a decision to do what was happened just a few years back when we were waived attorney client privilege and all that kind of stuff, um, and now reaping that. When I say we, the convention messengers largely did. I wasn't at that one, for that to have happened, but. So yeah, I think that's another one that, yeah, understandably there's a system in place already. We got to work on that. And I do think I think it's worth that the top people at each one, we should know, right?
yeah.
Are we overpaying? I mean, every college knows that too. I mean, that's part of that. So it shouldn't be, it's not like something out of the ordinary, to
Yeah.
ask for that. So
Now, one of the things that Jeff Ward did say is that one of the drivers of salary inflation across the boards is the release of that information, and then the schools keep kind of one up each other to get the next person. And what ends up happening is you blow these salaries at the top way up, where I think a
yeah,
lot of our messengers would like to see them come down.
yeah,
And that's another counter argument. Some of the stuff needs a healthy debate that's not from the floor.
yeah,
This is where we could
exactly.
have panels and leadership to say, hey, because when you just get a Twitter feed and a podcast and you hear one side of the issue, you're very much persuaded. Um, but yeah, this is
Yeah.
complicated stuff. And nobody's rejecting this because we want financial deceit in our
No, no,
convention.
no,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just
So
yeah. And once again, it's just I think that was my big takeaway is that it's not that people are not that we don't like each other or that we're trying to mess one over. I think there's just fundamental like what's the best way to do this is kind of what it comes down to for a lot. And I will say I think we are big tent, and I think there are many liberals, and I think there are some sneaky folks that are part of this. But I don't necessarily think. My hope is that that's not, uh, a huge part of that is that that's minimal. Um, okay, so third one that we were looking at was abolish the ERLC. That one I think is a shocker if you think about it.
Yeah.
because the motion was made to abolish the ERLC. People are looking for reform. At the end of the day, the motion, that even the guy who brought it forward said, this is not about trying to get rid of it. We don't think that the ERLC needs to be done away with, but we do need change. And so let's see where we're at. It was really more of a shot to say, where are we at? And are we happy with the direction that it's going? And despite the fact, people are saying that ERLC got like a prominent space in the convention floor, and they got to put their literature on every single chair for all those people. They still, the vote was 40%
Yeah.
of our convention says it's time for them to be done. Um, and I think, was it just a few years back when we were in Anaheim, it was like a 10%. Like it
Yeah.
was barely anything. And so what that should tell people is the people are upset, and they're upset about the direction, and
Yeah.
what we see is either a lack of focus on the things that we think they should be focused on, and their involvement in areas that they don't need to be involved in. And so that was a big shocker for sure.
Yeah, and that could have been higher. Richard Land comes to the microphone, and
Hmm.
Richard Land is the former director or president of the ERLC back in the glory conservative days of the resurgence. Now, and he was at the meeting in the night prior about the discussion of how we're going to take control of our things, and so I think everyone was shocked when Richard Land comes up and says, "You need the ERLC, don't do this." And that stole votes from it too, So this is the stuff that happens. But I love Richard Land. I don't know everything about Richard Land, but I've seen him on the old videos, standing with Al Mohler and these guys. And, so I'd love it if we could just get Richard Land to take it over again for another year or two. I think that would help. But he brought up a key point. Right now, this big, beautiful bill has the opportunity of defunding Planned Parenthood. And for the largest denomination and its largest lobby of evangelical denomination to show itself to be in flux and that we're not in agreement could be taken by folks to say, oh, the Baptists aren't unified on this issue. And so I don't think that would have happened, but he brought up that kind of scare tactic, and it's not unheard of. Defunding Planned Parenthood would be huge. I can live with the RLC for another year if it puts any weight on the senators to approve this bill to defund Planned Parenthood. So, those are the kind of things. This isn't going away. I will say this, man, ERLC looks pretty conservative in its most recent posts.
Yeah.
So, at least they're going to play like they're with the rest of us, I think, for a little while. So yeah, those are the big three issues. I don't know. Should we do another video coming back on the resolutions?
Yeah,
Uh,
I think we should, because I've got to head out in just a second. I do think the resolutions were absolutely super conservative, which was like, okay, yes, right? Like you don't leave, and that was what I thought was so crazy for those guys who were like, it's time to go, we're done, to then say, look at what we just put out as our resolutions. And I do think maybe next week we can sift through those, maybe
yeah,
talk more about
I'd
individually
like to
what they
spend some time
say.
on them. Yeah.
I think it'd be good, but you can't leave and say, "Man, we're turning left and we're going the wrong direction." When you look at what we just put out, and I thought, man, it was so good. It was Andrew Walker, who's from Southern, their ethics guy, who was the guy who did it. He was awesome, and just putting those out there. So very proud of our resolutions that we put out. Now, granted, they're non-binding, right? They're just statements of kind of where we're at.
But
Um,
that's what the ERLC uses to lobby
yes,
on our behalf. So
yes,
that's what the news is all about. Then all the
yeah,
stuff we just talked about, that's inside pool. But the
yeah.
resolutions are what the whole world says. Oh, you Baptists,
This is what we
you,
believe. This is what we're at.
so
This is what we have to this is what the will of the messengers are that they need to
yeah.
pursue. So very
So
happy with that. Good stuff for sure.
all right. Anyway, it was positive. We're gonna have to make this a part one. I know you got to run for those kids.
Gotta,
So
exactly. It's good, man.
Uh, I'm not discouraged though. I'll just say I'm not discouraged. I think our stuff failed, but it didn't fail in a way that I would lose hope. And
Yeah,
next year will be another year, and presidential election. These issues drive conservatives to the meetings.
yeah.
So even the losses, I think, are a win long term for us.
And I'll say
So
this, next year's in Orlando. If any of you church people who want to go, make it your job. Find out how many people your church can send and go. Oh, let me say this last piece I thought was this was the disheartening piece, right? This was the disheartening is when you look at how many messengers we sent. 10,000 messengers were there, only 6,000 voted, right? That is the thing. Okay, we got to fix that. If you go participate, think about what I don't know how that needle would have moved if those 4,000 would have voted in as well, right? But
yeah.
that we should go, and there's no reason why we should only be seeing 10,000 people at a convention. We need to be sending more people. Churches need to send, they need to show up. Go to Orlando next year, make it a point to be there, and then stay in those rooms to vote. Don't just turn it into my church paid trip to go do whatever. Like participate.
Yeah, just it's 2 to 3 days, depending on if you make the pastors conference. It's not a huge commitment
It's for
and get
sure.
there. So, yeah, all right. Well, close this out, brother.
Let's do it, man. May the
All right.
Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. Guys, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.